Hi, I want to welcome you to the Diverse Jewish Books podcast, where our goal is to uplift diverse experiences in Jewish Kidlit. Today, I am very excited to welcome Michael Leventhal, owner and publisher at Greenhill and Green Bean Books and children's book author. Hi, Michael.
Hi, I'm excited and vaguely terrified as well.
No, this should not be terrifying at all. There is actually tremendous excitement and interest in hearing from you. Can you tell me a bit about yourself and what being Jewish looks like to you?
I've been in publishing now for 25 years and counting, and I'm delighted actually to be in this world. I started doing history books with my father, and then when I became a parent, I have two young sons. I started reading children's books, and within that, Jewish children's books, and I decided to start doing that as well. So I'm still doing the military history books, but I'm also doing Jewish children's books and now a few Jewish cookbooks as well, which was never part of the plan, but I kind of got seduced by it. At the second part of the question about what's Jewish to me, that's we would need a few hours on that. We would need longer because um I am most familiar with the North London Jews that I see every day, but I've met Jews around the world. My wife has Egyptian and Syrian heritage.
And you have been very active in the UK Jewish community, I believe. Is that fair to say?
Yes, although it's an extremely small community. I mean, relative to the States, we have, I think it's around 330,000 people in the Jewish community here. Um, I think, apart from the Haredi world, I'm the only publisher of Jewish children's books in the UK. I'm active in some groups of Jewish publishers that or Jewish publishing professionals, Jewish editors that work for other bigger companies, and those groups have become over the last now year and a half have become more important. Sadly, as a response to October 7th.
You spoke about anti-Semitism in the publishing world in the UK in a recent-ish article that was published. Can you tell me more about that experience? How have you been combating anti-Semitism?
That's a good question. It's a difficult question and a difficult question to answer. I think I've experienced anti-Semitism um, before and after October the 7th in different ways. I have been prepared to speak about it and to say exactly what I think. I've been slightly nervous by the reaction that it's prompted and if it would affect me or my family. So I quite careful about it, but at the same time, I think it's important that things are said. Um, in response to something I had written, there was an email directed to me saying that someone would rape my mother in synagogue, and but the hairs are standing up on the back of my head thinking about that again, and that's hideous to receive such a vile message, and I don't want to put my family in any danger. So um, I'm slightly nervous about speaking about anti-Semitism in publishing, but I think it's important too. And certainly there are plenty of other people that are doing it and that are really going out to bat and that are being very brave, I think, and bold in what they're saying. But my personal experience, other than some stupid comments being made and occasional threats being made, is in fact that my non-Jewish colleagues have been extremely supportive and understanding. I've been really surprised is probably an unfair word, but I've been really grateful for the support that I've had from non-Jewish colleagues since October 7th.
It's a great answer and it's an honest answer. Tell me about like an amazing reader response that you've seen in response to something that you've published or put out there.
Can I give you two? Am I allowed two?
Please, that's
Because
amazing.
I'll quickly tell you two. But the one of the nicest messages in response to a book, but also possibly one of the nicest messages I've ever had in my life, was after I published a book by Shira Geffen, an Israeli writer, and illustrated by David Polonsky, who did Waltz with Bashir, the Anne Frank graphic memoir, who's a wonderful Israeli illustrator. And I published an edition of their originally Hebrew language book. and it's about a heart. It's called The Heart-Shaped Leaf, and it's about a leaf that kind of is a magical leaf, and it's a very sweet story set in Tel Aviv. And I had a letter from, she was called Edie Hincliffe. She was a 7-year-old, and she said that on her way to school, she'd read the book, and on the way to school, she found a heart-shaped leaf, and she asked her mummy and daddy what to do with it, and her mummy and daddy said that they thought that I would like it. So she wrote me the most gorgeous card, which I then passed on to the author, because she'd sellotaped a heart-shaped leaf into this card, and that the book could have had such an immediate, tangible, impact on this 7-year-old was wonderful. But also a kind of and that was it was just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. But then, really, this was just yesterday. I'm working on another book with an English author, Dina Leafer, and an Israeli illustrator, Sharon Spitz, and it's about a child who's very extremely picky about their food and always rejects everything his parents serve, but it's dealt with in a very gentle, humorous way. It's quite an understanding book, and it's not in any way critical of the child at all. And it was a lovely message from a reviewer who is autistic and has had some food challenges, and I think continues to, saying that it was wonderful to see someone like that being presented, and that she felt seen. And a great challenge for all children's book publishers, not just Jewish ones, is that everyone should feel seen. It's such, a shame that so much of children's book publishing is really limited when every child wants to be seen. They want to see themselves represented, or people they know, or people want their children represented, or that, and to feel that we had done that was wonderful. So that was yesterday, and I forwarded on the message to the author and the illustrator, and both of them were overjoyed to get that kind of interaction and response.
Because everybody should be able to see themselves in the pages of books.
100, absolutely, absolutely.
One of the reasons I was really excited to chat with you was because you had mentioned to me that you noticed that 90% of protagonists in the stories that you were reading were white and male in children's books. And you mentioned that you're changing this, and you just gave me like a very concrete example. Can you talk to me about how you're changing that and why it's important to you?
It's I mean, look, I have to be honest and say that I'm a commercial book publisher, and I need to sell books. It would be lovely if I didn't have to make a profit on books, but I need to. So I have to cater for what the market wants, what people will buy. So I have to be honest about that. But at the same time, it is ridiculous. I mean, I'd like to think, I'm a North London middle class Jewish person, and I'd like to think I'm quite open minded. But it was, a kind of penny drop moment when I looked at the 100 or 200 books I'd bought for my own children and thought, they're all about white male kids. There's no, you don't see anyone different, really. And it's terrible. But if you go into a bookshop, that's what you'll see. The majority of the books are white male protagonists, and there's no reason for that. So I I I, I think that my job is to sell books, and to sell books, they should be primarily books that entertain and engage readers. That's the main job, and you won't get anywhere. Now, if they also educate people, that's great. But I'm not a publisher of textbooks. I have to entertain people, but you can still do that and include diversity within the books. It has to be subtle. I think it's artwork or stories that are thunderingly unsubtle and are just there to make a point of can often be a very dull read. So I've got to make my books, entertaining and engaging. But within that, there's still a lot you can do. One thing I'll mention that I'm very proud of, I published last year a book with Braille. And as far as I know, there has only ever been one other book printed with Braille. What publishers sometimes or charities will take a book, rip its spine off, and then splice in Braille on an acetate, so it's accessible to blind or visually impaired people. But what I wanted to do is have it together, so you don't have an ugly spiral bound thing. And it was a lot of work, but we published a book with Braille, and it means that not just members of the blind community, it means that, if you are reading the book to anyone, or if I'm reading to my kids, they get to feel Braille, they get to touch it, they get to experience it. They might have learned about Louis Braille in school, but to actually feel something, to feel Braille and start understanding, oh, okay, like that's. So there are lots of things that publishers can do to make books more accessible and inclusive, I think.
What was the motivation for you in publishing a book that had Braille in it?
Well, I can't remember if it was my idea or the author's idea. It was probably the author's idea because it's a very expensive thing to do. So I probably wouldn't. I don't remember. But the book is about the senses. The book is about sound and touch and hearing and sight. And all of those senses are represented. And then quite far in, the author and I were chatting and thought, why don't we make the character blind? Let's have the protagonist will be a blind boy. In England, we would say blind. I think in the States, people might say visually impaired, but in England, I think the word blind is used. We thought we can make the child blind, and crucially, the story isn't about being blind. The story is about a restful Shabbat. And my son is unilaterally deaf. He has only hearing in one ear. Books about deafness are so terrible. It's like, oh, Donnie's deaf. He can't hear his alarm. And they're awful books. And I wanted to do something where the blindness was just incidental. It has no impact on the story. It affects the artwork, but that's not what the book is about. And there should be this casual inclusion of this, of this kind of thing. That's what I was aiming for there.
And you did it beautifully in This Is My Shabbat.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's Aviel Basil's artwork. He's an Israeli illustrator and had a very nice lunch with him yesterday in London. He's over for football.
That's excellent. I want to talk a little bit more about Green Bean Books. Can you talk about what sort of content Green Bean typically publishes? What are you actively seeking right now?
Green Bean somehow accidentally ended up publishing some Jewish cookbooks, which I did a fundraiser in lockdown, a chocolate cookbook, which raised a lot for a High Cancer Care, which is a charity in England. But really, the idea of Green Bean was to publish books with Jewish content. I started doing books for 4 to 8 because that's how old my kids were. So I was reading, the same books time and time again. I'm now doing books for 0 to 4s, board books, and a few mid grade. Not too many mid grade. I mean, I'm looking really for great narratives with subtle messages, as I kind of alluded to before. But it's a tricky question, and someone asked me this a few years ago at a conference, and I said that it's a bit like going over to my parents' house where you look in the fridge, and my mum used to say, "What are you looking for?" And I said, I don't know, but I'll know when I find it." And it's the same. Like, I'm not going out looking for a book on, I think there's, sorry, I'm contradicting myself. It would be nice if there were more Joha stories. There are Helm stories, and it would be nice if there were more Sephardi stories to balance all the Ashkenazi tales we have. But beyond that, there are so many gaps in Jewish children's publishing. I'm open to all ideas. There are so many huge gaps. There's been, like for instance, there's been quite a wave of Iraqi Jewish children's books just over the last few years, which is a whole interesting phenomenon. But there's been my wife's mother and family came out of Egypt in 1958. As far as I know, there's been nothing whatsoever about the modern Jews of Egypt. So that's one area that no one has tackled thus far. And there are Jews from other countries as well that nothing has been published about. There have been a few Ethiopian Jewish stories, but there are huge gaps, in the literature at the moment.
And what are you most excited about on your list right now?
This is not you. I think, Lauren, you can't ask a question like that because that's like if someone said, "Who's my favorite child?" Like, it's you can't do that without offending some. Like, I think there's no. It's like, I mean, I deliberately published a small number of books because then I can be very heavily involved with each book, and I'm very excited about each book. But that's like saying to, a friend who's got 5 kids, which is your favorite? You can't. I think that question should never be asked of publishers. I think it can only lead to trouble.
Okay, talk to me about the relationship that you have with the authors that you work with, and what does that look like?
Oh gosh, I'd like to think it's a good relationship until they get their royalty statements anyway. I have a sort of policy of only working with people that where we get on, because it's a it's a bit like a marriage, that from someone sending me a manuscript to me liking it, you're then going to be in bed with them for not just for weeks, for months, for it's you're in bed together for years. So, because if I publish a book, it's because I think it's a book that's going to sell for decades to come. So so you want to be in a obviously want that to be a good relationship, and you want to be honest right from the word go, what my expectations are, what my sales, realistically, this is how many copies I think will sell. If you're on Instagram every day, so I think you have to be honest right from the word go. And I like to think I've got very good relationships with my authors. I'm going to Israel next week, and I'm meeting the authors for lunch, breakfast, dinner, and afternoon. So I think generally they're good relations. I if I can think of any bad ones, then I probably wouldn't say it, but I can't immediately think of any.
What's the backbone for you of the relationship with the authors that you work with? Like, what is the most important thing in that connection?
Oh gosh, that's a very good question, and I don't know. I think, as I said, I think it's honesty from the very start. In total, I've published now almost 1,000 books over the last 25 years, and I have a process. I have a method of bringing books through, right from the contract stage to the promotion stage to backlisting, but still selling books. And if there are authors that I've worked with, we've done 10 or 15 books, we understand the process. But for many people, if they're writing a book for the first time, they don't understand the process. They don't know if they're allowed to ask that, or if they're allowed to say that. So I think as long as it's a very direct, honest relationship from the word go, so there's no misunderstanding, everyone knows what to expect, I guess that's the basic kind of starting point.
That's a really important starting point. Talking specifically to the aspiring authors and illustrators who are going to be listening to this podcast, what advice would you give them breaking into the market?
I would say to persevere. People that are good end up being published, I think. I would say that it's extremely important for any author or illustrator to know who they're pitching to, because I would say that I get at least one submission every day, and I'm relatively new. I mean, you can fit what I know about children's books on the back of a postage stamp. I've been in history books a long time, but children's books I'm still relatively new to. But I am amazed at how many people write to me, and they ask me to publish a non-fiction book for older readers about something that is totally unrelated, and it's really obvious that they don't know what I do. And it's not that I have a massive ego at all, it's but if someone writes and they've taken the time to find out my name, and they say, "Oh, hi, Michael. I wanted to be in touch. I love some of the books you published. I loved, This Is My Shabbat. I loved Oh My Hoffman's this, and what I've written feels similar and might be right." Then that immediately shows me that they've done a bit of research. They do know what I do, because I don't think it's an exaggeration to say at least 75% of the emails I get, they're about things that just aren't relevant, because they're things that they might be great, but they're not things that I can publish. So I would every publisher has submission guidelines on their website. Every publisher will do. And the first basic step, but at least 50% of people don't do it, just check the submission guidelines, because it's a bit like an interview before an interview. And if you write and you say, hey, I've read your submission guidelines, so I'm sending X, Y, and Z. Great. That's a starting point. You know that that person is going to be easy to deal with. So that's one thing.
I think you just gave us some helpful tips too for the query letter.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Can you tell us how agents and illustrators can submit to you? Tell me what your submission guidelines might say right now.
I like to know if people have submitted something elsewhere, partly because I do have an ego, so it's kind of nice if someone says, this is an exclusive submission and you're the first person to see it, because then I think, okay, I'm going to prioritize this one above the other 5 that have come in over the last week that are out with 15 other publishers. Why would I, if someone has made an effort to just write to me and it's a good letter and they want to be published by Green Bean because they've seen other great. That's, I'm a sucker for being flattered. So I'm happy to hear from anyone. I need a submission history, and it just really needs to be something that kind of fits what I do. I very occasionally do non-fiction, but not for kids, but not often. And the majority of my books are for 4 to 8s as well, but I'm doing more 0 to 4s as well. So anything really, very little mid-grade at the moment, but anything really from 0 to 4s and 4 to 8s with Jewish content as well. And it has to be Jewish content.
What did I not ask you about that I should have asked you about?
Oh, what did you not ask me about? Any massive mistakes I've made? I mean, I don't.
What can we learn from here?
Oh God,
I'm just kidding.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think the Jewish publishing world is a lovely world, and there are lots of nice support groups as well. There are lots of critique swapping groups as well. Okay, well, one thing that the last thing possibly that if it's of any use to anyone, to editors or authors, is that children's books are read out loud. They have to be, because I'm a dad, I will read to my kids out loud. And when someone is writing a book or editing, they've got to read it out, because you've got to hear how it sounds. It's not enough seeing it on the page. And if you read it out, then you can hear where you stumble, or where you actually don't even read the words that are there because they're not the best words. And you can see the reaction. I mean, if you want, just read it in front of a mirror, but read it out to some kids. Try it out on some. It's better to try it out on kids now than in a few months. So reading out loud, that's the thing that not enough people, I think, do.
Children
That
are
might be.
children are amazing beta readers. Um, all right, Michael, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the Diverse Jewish Books podcast today. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you
For
very much.
anyone who wants to submit to Green Bean Books, what is the website that they can go to in order to find your submission guidelines?
The website is, well, thank you as well. Thank you very much. And I think what you're doing is awesome as well, and long overdue as well in this kind of world. It's www.greenbeanbooks.com.
Thank you,
And on
Michael.
Instagram as well. And I can't, on Instagram and Twitter, I can't cope with TikTok at the moment. There's one platform too many for me.
Then we have your website and we have Instagram. Maybe we have Twitter. Definitely not TikTok.
Oh, Twitter, X, sorry, X, whatever. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Lauren. Thank you very much.